Alexander the Great of ancient Greece and the UFO flying shields he witnessed in Tyre. He called them flying shields. What else could he call them? But they were UFOs, of course. Now, did Alexander the Great and his army in fact see flying objects of unknown origin, UFOs as we call them, help him in the siege of Tyre in 332 BC? As there are no ancient texts or sources, as far as we can officially know, that mentions something relevant, similar, we cannot claim it. But there were well-known UFO researchers who seem to have in their hands or read some relevant texts about which they do not mention either the origin, the source, or the author. They kept their papers closed. These texts are considered to be by Megasthenes and Ptolemy. Ptolemy was one of Alexander's top generals. He was the one that inherited the area of Egypt. So we have these following facts. Raymond Drake, in his book The Gods and Astronauts in Greece and Rome, published London 1976, pages 115-116, states, "They may already be watching us from above. Kindly support my Patreon account since YouTube has again demonetized my YouTube channel." The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below. What can we say? We know that Alexander the Great was given prophecies. There were prophecies given to the prophet Daniel of the Old Testament by Archangel Gabriel, having to do with Alexander the Great, and that he would be coming from the north of Greece, and that very quickly he would conquer the known world and put an end to the Persian Empire. And when Alexander the Great went to visit the temple in Jerusalem, the high priests there told him and read this prophecy of Daniel to him. And then he went to Egypt, and he was declared Pharaoh of Egypt by the high priests of Egypt. And he was one of the emperors that went into the Great Pyramid of Giza. He was given an amulet there to be giving him successes. And we know that after that, Julius Caesar was given an amulet, and also Napoleon was given an amulet to be given victories. But he lost that amulet at an inn in Austria, where the inn was destroyed by a fire, and so was his amulet. And after that, he kept on having defeats, and we know that Waterloo was his destruction. But going back to Alexander the Great, there were those commenting on the attitude of Giovanni Gustavo Droysen, the famous German 19th century historian, not to mention the following incidents, because he took it as an exaggeration of the Macedonians, that is the King Alexander the Great. In the Storia di Alessandro di Grande, History of Alexander the Great, what Fenoglio wrote was also translated by Drake a few years later. Quote, "Alexander the Great was not the first to see them." We're talking about the shields, the flying shields, or what we would call UFOs. He was not the first to see them, nor was he the first to be bothered by them. He tells us about 2 strange ships, of course crafts, airships, that repeatedly rushed into his army until his war elephants and men and horses panicked such an extent that they refused to cross the river where the incident took place. Note probably the Jaxartes River. What did these things look like? His historian describes them as large shining shields which fired fire around the fringes, things that came from heaven and returned to heaven. Now remember that all these kings, especially when they went on conquests, had their historians with them. Their medical doctors, their botanists, whatever you want, their scientists, and they had journals kept of whatever was going there, what they were seeing, what they were observing, what was happening. So his historian describes them as large shining shields which fired fire around the fringes, things that came from heaven and returned to heaven. This remarkable incident was apparently paralleled by an equally fantastic visit during the siege of Tyre by Alexander in 332 BC. The well-known Italian Alberto Fenoglio, in the History of Flying Objects of the Past, mentions, while below you can also read this translation of it, the Siege of Tyre by L'Assedio di Orio. Durante l'assedio di Orio, anno 332 AC. Okay, that's in Italian. The story of Alexander the Great, voluntarily not quoted, retained part of the fantasy of Macedonian soldiers. The fortress does not give way, but its walls on the ground give rise to a quantity of meters and build solidly without any wind machine in the gradation of Danneggiarelli. They also have large technical and machine speed components that are designed for an array of high frequency and scaffolding projects from catapults. Then there's Italian here. Translation from the paragraph. The fortress did not fall. Its walls were 50 feet high and were so solid that no siege engine could destroy them. The Tyrians, properly positioned, the greatest technicians and manufacturers of war machines of the time, stopped in the air the arrows and missiles fired at the city from the catapults of the Macedonians. One day, suddenly, these flying shields, we're talking about the UFOs, as they call them, flying shields, appeared over the Macedonian camp of Alexander the Great, flying in a triangular formation with an overly large shield to guide them. I guess that was the mothership guiding them. The rest were smaller, almost half the size. They were 5 in total. The unknown chronicler reports that they circled slowly over Tyre, while thousands of warriors on both sides sat motionless, watching them in awe. Suddenly, lightning flashed from the largest shield, meaning the mothership, hitting the collapsing walls. Other lightnings followed. Can you imagine what was going on? I mean, the UFOs were taking part in the war here on Earth. Walls and towers were falling apart as if they had been built of mud, leaving the way open for the besiegers, who then poured out like an avalanche, meaning Alexander the Great. The flying shields, the UFO, hovered over the city until it was completely occupied by Alexander the Great. Then they quickly disappeared high, leaving behind a clear blue sky. Historical sources for all this do not seem to exist. If, however, we combine the above with some strange information that refers to the Alexander's lifting, anavasi, meaning going up, perhaps a conclusion could be drawn, but again, not particularly safe. And I've translated this for you from a Greek article. And remember, from one of the previous Greek articles, we were told that an Atlantean extraterrestrial from the Arctic, remember that the ancient text said that there were portals in the north and south of the Earth, the Arctic and Antarctic areas, that there were portals for extraterrestrials and their spaceships to use them as space portals, I guess what you would call them. And also that an extraterrestrial Atlantean sent a special weapon, a high technology thing for Alexander the Great to use. That was, it was like the lightning rods of Zeus or something. And then they gave the copy of his generals supposedly buried it in a secret place at the edge of China, because supposedly Alexander the Great got to the edge of the continent of China, facing the Pacific Ocean. And let's remember, we have even ancient Greek theaters in China in excellent condition. And we've also seen recently the videos from the recent ancient Greek theater found in a desert in Peru. So what were these ancient Greek theaters doing in China if Alexander the Great didn't get there? So very strange stuff, especially with these UFOs taking part in these campaigns of Alexander the Great and helping him with all this. Very strange. What does that mean? And how does that tie in with the prophecy in the prophecy of the Old Testament book of Daniel? Okay, just something else that I thought you would find interesting. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support.